So you're here because you're wanting to learn a little bit about working with a factory, right? This is the early stage. So I want to talk about this. When I started this business 7 years ago, I was in a very similar situation to you guys, not quite sure the right way to communicate with a factory, unsure about what questions to ask, how to make things mutually beneficial, and ultimately knowing where the risks were coming from, right? And so over the years, I've worked with many different factories in the US, but also overseas, in Peru, in China, in Vietnam, in Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, India. I mean, a lot of them. My biggest piece of advice here, which I'll mention again later on, is that you start local. You start in the US where you can communicate and manage things better. And so we'll get into that a little bit more. Our company, if you're not familiar, and for those of you that are just coming in, I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Zach Hurley. I'm the CEO and co-founder of IndieSource. We build successful fashion companies. That's it. We support them from pre-revenue through design, development, manufacturing, and the launch. We have supported over 250 brands with this at this point. So I feel extremely qualified to have this conversation and to talk about the things necessary to get you guys working the right way with a manufacturer, okay? Whether that's us or somebody else, I honestly am so much more committed to you guys just moving past pure revenue. That is my priority. And just to give you a sense of some of the types of brands we've worked with, yes, some of them have been more well-known or bigger companies. We've done stuff with Frame Denim and Khloe Kardashian's line. We've also worked with a lot of indie designers and people that you might not even know because it's a totally different demographic. So a bunch of kids lines, some interesting invention lines, which I really love because they're solving a problem. And, you know, everything from heart monitor shirts to anti-gravity workout suits, 50-foot-long towels. We've worked on all sorts of different projects and worked with the, you know, just independents like you, as well as influencers, celebrities, athletes, musicians. And the thing is everybody wants to make something and they want to start a line, but the emphasis is they want to, right? So we want to talk about what is necessary to put something together and how it's massively underestimated. In fact, I would say that over 30% of the people who contact us do not even realize that there is product development as a thing, that that's necessary, right? When I say product development, I mean the fabric sourcing, pattern making, sample making, right? And we get pitched over 50 times a week. So that's a sizable amount of people that contact us not knowing that that's necessary. So imagine how much fun I, as a manufacturer, have offering something to someone who doesn't even know they need that thing, right? I would love to not have to do that. I would love to go right into production and work on your adult onesie line, right? But it just doesn't work like that. And so therein lies the beginning of the disconnect between factories and fashion entrepreneurs. It all starts with an understanding of what each party needs to do to get the project done and into the market. So it's about empathy, guys. It's just all about empathy and understanding the other side. Today, we're going to talk about how to start this relationship with clear expectations and about how each side will operate. The reason this is important is because your factory is the group that is going to be bringing your product to life and will be consistently making your product as you grow. So there's just no more important relationship than your factory. If you don't have product, you don't have a business, right? So let's jump into this. So I can imagine that many of you are feeling a little bit anxious, I would say, right? Anxious, excited. Some of you have been thinking about doing this for a very, very long time, right? You've done this for a very, very long time, but you haven't just pulled the trigger on it, right? The typical internal dialogue, I would love to know if this resonates with you. So let me know, chat me if this resonates with you, but this is what I hear very often. You get pumped up, something happens, you're very excited, right? Maybe you read a book or you saw a YouTube video. You say, you know what? I am amazing. I am awesome. I can start this business. I've been thinking about it. I've been dreaming about this. And I'm sick of working for someone else. I'm sick of not having control of my life. I want to be able to control my destiny and I want to manage how I spend my time, right? So you get excited, you say, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start my line. I'm going to be an entrepreneur, right? So what do I need first? Okay, I need a manufacturer, right? I need a factory. Okay, so you go online, you Google, how do I find or manufacturers in Los Angeles or manufacturer or clothing manufacturers, whatever, right? You say, oh, look, Indie Source. That seems great. Okay, let's call. You get on the phone, you call them. Hi, this is Zach. I'm a new designer and I want to start my clothing line. Sure. Tell me about your line. Well, I want to start a line of, I don't know, onesies for cats. How much does it cost? Silence on the other line. If you don't know what you want to make, it becomes very confusing. And so this is where the disconnect comes. Many of you guys are so used to going out into the world, whether you're in retail or whether you're going to get a hamburger and asking how much does it cost? But there are a lot of other pieces to this process, right? So what I'm thinking when you say that you want to start this line is, okay, well, tell me more. And what you're thinking is, well, I've just told you what I want to do. So what's next? How much does it cost, right? So you need to know the right questions to ask. I'm thinking, how many colors, what kinds of fabrics, what are your price points? How many units do you want to make, right? Because for us in any real factory, we do everything from scratch, okay? Not from a catalog, and this doesn't apply to what you're doing because the thing that you want to make doesn't exist, right? And so that's the kind of like the mentality shift that we need you guys to be making here. The thing that you want to make doesn't exist, and that's super cool, but the way that we go about making it is very different, right? So we're starting with the end in mind. We're starting with that, and then we have to work backwards. So let's talk about some of those things. All right, so right here, in terms of the product development, okay, we talked about this a little bit, but there's a couple of important questions that need to be answered, all right? The first is, what kind of fabrics and trim am I using? And how many different colors, right? So the factory, at some point, and probably in the very beginning, they're gonna need to know what they're looking for. So one of the easiest things that you can do is you go out into the market, you go into the store, or you go into your closet, maybe you have something, and you find a fabric you really love, that you think is gonna be perfect for what you're making. And you need to take that and bring that to your manufacturer and give them a physical piece of fabric or trim. Trim, I mean the zipper, button, other things, okay? And then if there's associated colors, you want to bring that to them. This is how you start to communicate with your manufacturer. And maybe you don't love the weight of it, right? And maybe you wish it was a little bit stretchier, but those are things you can communicate. They need a reference point, okay? So in the beginning, we're making cat onesies, right? Well, we need to figure out what that fabric is. So you need to find something in the market that is similar. And if you want something different, you just have to communicate that. Next is patterns. So this is the same thing. And if any of you have talked to me, I've probably said this to you. You need to have what we call a fit reference sample. This is some garment that is a starting point for the fit that you want to achieve. Because you don't have the background in fashion, you don't have the measurements lined up, you need to start with something, right? So this is what you do before you even get to the factory, right? That's why this is important. Because the more prepared you are when you talk to them, the better the relationship's going to be, okay? So you have fabrics, you have a reference sample, some garment that has the measurements and the fit that you like, plus your notes, plus the things you want to change about that garment. You want to make it longer, shorter, Frankenstein it together, it's fine. But you got to give them something tangible, something to start with, okay? Do you have a tech pack? Some of you might have that already, some of you don't, and you need that to be made. But that's just like the information that follows the material, the products that you're making. And a lot of times tech packs are made in the beginning because it's the blueprint for the whole project, okay? Another thing here, just to bring up, is price points. So any manufacturer is gonna wanna know what you're making, right? Because that's gonna really impact the way we make the thing. So if you tell me you're making something, you're gonna be selling it at retail for $120, say it's a pair of leggings, right? It's gonna be very different about the way that we produce a $120 pair of leggings, the fabric we use, the construction, than a $60 pair of leggings. So knowing those retail price points is extremely important because again, they're not you aren't reaching out to a catalog company. This is a manufacturer and they can build whatever you want. Okay. Now I want to just clarify there's a few different types of manufacturers manufacturers. So this is about deciding who you will go to. The first one is called a full package. This is what IndieSource does. Full package means we procure the materials, we buy all of the fabric, we check that in, we check the quality, then we move that in, we do all the cutting, the sewing, the printing, the packing, the folding, the whole thing. It's full service, right? That's what full package means. We believe this is important because we serve emerging designers. We serve the independent folks, right? And so for us, we know that they need that entire support system so they can focus on selling and marketing their business, because usually it's a small team. Usually it's one person or a few people working on this, and it's just not possible for them to manage all this other stuff. And it would just be a bad business decision. So that's full package. CMT, or cut and sew, are companies that don't buy the material. So you guys would buy the material, you would get the information, and you would send all of that material to your cut and sew manufacturer. Now, we do this too because sometimes designers really want to buy their own stuff, and that's okay, so long as they send everything completely organized, labeled. We need packing slips. You really have to give them everything. And that can be one way to do it, right? So the CMT would do the cutting, the sewing, and then maybe the packing, right? That's about it. The last one is piecemeal, which I do not recommend for any emerging designer, but that's, going out into this fragmented industry we have and finding one person that does marking and grading, right? And you get your markers done. And then you go to some cutting house and you have them do the cutting. And then you go to a sewing shop and they do your sewing. The problem here, again, is that you're spreading it. Number one, you're spreading yourself too thin, but more importantly, you don't have the background of production to do this. And it's only recommended for somebody that has a tremendous amount of experience, because when you go to that sewing shop, they are not going to talk to you about anything except dropping off that cut. And that cut should have a sample and should have everything organized. And they're just not going to deal with the organization. They just sew. They just sew. Okay, so those are some of the different types of manufacturers for you guys to take a look at. I need to plug myself in. Okie doke. Next, asking the right questions. So it's important. Let's see. Basically, what we're saying here is that there's a couple of questions that have come up recently. I want to just talk to those. So one is it acceptable for a factory to ask for a factory tour before working with them? The answer is yes, but they need to feel that you are serious about working with them. They need to feel like there's a real job on the table, because they will have to spend their time going out, bring you, and there may be other customers or other brand stuff that's on the sewing machine too. So it's also kind of an issue of privacy, okay? Second thing, asking them what other brands they have worked with, right? That's a really important one. You wanna know who they've worked with. You wanna know whether, if you're doing button downs, have they done button downs? If you're doing athletic apparel, have they done that, right? So ask them those specific questions. Certifications and licenses is very common. So, definitely make sure they have that. And then this is the big one, contracts. Factories in this industry historically do not sign contracts. And it's really interesting because they really should. And that was one of the things that was just mind blowing to me when I got started. And so we do sign contracts. I think there's liability there you need to just cover. So ask if they sign a contract. Ask if they sign a contract. I think it's worth asking. And then, just make sure you're doing your research and you're comparing apples to apples. Like I was saying before, there's a lot of different types of manufacturers. All right. The next thing you want to talk about is what's the approval process in development and production? So at what stages do I, as a designer, get to have control over the big decisions? So for example, we always have approval of fabrics before we source even sample yardage to make your first samples. So that puts you in the driver's seat to approve the materials you want to use. We don't, however, have pattern approvals because most of our clients don't have a background in patterns, and so that's not valuable. But they've already told us the measurements, so we know what specs they need to hit, and then they get to see the samples and approve those. In production, you should be sure to have an approval of your pre-production samples. This is a sample that's made after your production fabric arrives, but before cutting. This is the last huge quality check before bulk cutting. And that's where you just make sure that everything is right. So there's no possibilities of an issue. Sometimes fabric that's production could be slightly different, coming from a different lot. Last thing, you want to have a statement of work. So there should not be hidden fees or anything like that. But what I do find is that sometimes one party doesn't know they need something, and then it kind of feels like a hidden fee, even though it's not. So some examples are multiple rounds of sampling. So every sample that you guys do costs money. So be sure to have clarity about whether your manufacturer or development house is including multiple rounds of samples and multiple rounds of pattern revisions, because you're not going to just do one. If you're making something from scratch, there will be a few rounds of sampling for sure. Some other examples I see often are packing, shipping labels, hang tags, the labor that goes into that. There's always setup costs for dyeing and printing, which is important to think about. We always take those on in the development stage. And then sample yardage. So not the labor of making the samples, but the actual materials that you use. All right. Next is timelines and factory responsibilities. This is a little bit more esoteric for the factory, but we have to cut twice, we have to measure twice and cut once, and really be careful about the quality because it's so valuable. Open communication and transparency. So basically, this is just having that conversation about expectations for communicating. How often can I expect a call? And just ask. It's not going to be daily, and you shouldn't be talking to each other daily, but maybe weekly, maybe every other week. Agree to something and just stick to that, right? It's important that both sides do that. And then the last thing is sticking to delivery dates, which every factory needs to do. And of course, there are always things that come up in this industry, but the factory needs to be contacting you when there are any issues or delays or anything like that as soon as they know. Next is your responsibilities. Don't change the statement of work, right? So one of the biggest things that push back delivery dates is when the designer changes what they want to do, right? And so it's important that that doesn't change. So make all your changes in the very beginning. Again, that's why product development is so important. If it's a cut and sew job, just make sure you get your materials to the factory. Make sure it has all of the information up to date so that doesn't create an issue, right? That can be very frustrating when we get tons of different fabric and nothing's labeled, and we just have to spend a lot of time organizing it for a fashion brand that didn't send it organized. Lack of information on all styles and fabrics can cause major delays. So we talked about that. And then lastly, it's kind of just like deciding whether you want to know how the sausage is made, the intricacies of all this production stuff, or if you want to let them get to work. And so some manufacturers may require a retainer or basically payment for the amount of time that you're spending. And that may make sense for you, but you may want to just be focusing on the business and the growth. So talk about that and understand what type of involvement you'd like to have, and if they're able to give you that support and education. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, minimum order quantities, right? This is one of the first questions we are always asked. What's your MOQ, right? So I want to talk about that because I think that it's important to understand why we have MOQs, what they're there for, right? And to demonstrate that, I want to talk first about what we call non-value add activities. This is overhead. These are basically the things that we have to do, whether we're making 50 units or 50,000 units, right? These are things that we go through no matter what, right? And so coordinating with vendors, sending purchase orders, right? Remember that all the different things that make up your products, we have to send purchase orders to every vendor, right? That takes time. We have to pick up and receive materials. We have to check them in, review the quality. We have to test, right? We have to approve patterns. We have to spec garments. We have to measure them. We have to do marking and grading. We have to approve that to make sure that it was done accurately. We have to bundle and place cuts. So just the organization of material, again, whether it's just a little bit or a lot, it doesn't change that we have to do that. Changing thread on machines. These are fixed costs that don't go away no matter what, right? And so that's one of the reasons why manufacturers have minimums, because we'll go to an example in a second, the costs are too high if they don't spread that out over lots of units, right? So now at the bottom, as a contrast to that, are value add activities. This includes things like the needle to thread, the knife cutting the fabric, oh, no typo there, packing and folding, printing, the actual performance of the action that the brand is paying for. Those are variable costs. That makes sense, guys? So those are the two different things. So I'm going to give you an example over here now. Here's an example, just to break it down for you so it's super easy. Let's say it costs a manufacturer $1,000 in fixed costs to run any job, okay? $1,000. If we're doing 50 units, you divide 1,000 across 50 units, that's $20 in fixed costs, right? That's $20. Now, if you take that and you add the variable costs, the cutting, the sewing, the trimming, right, the actual making, let's say we're gonna say that's $6 in this example. Now you have a $26 item. Now, if you're doing a t-shirt, that might be a little high, right? Now, depending on your price point, this is okay and it works, or you really need to get your price point down. And as you can see, as you go down, you do 100 units, you do 300 units, that fixed cost spread out across all of the units comes down, okay? So that's why that's so important. That's why that's so important. So what you need to do is decide if testing, basically if you wanna do economies of scale and do a lot, or you want to go with smaller units, mitigating inventory with less, okay? Both of them are okay and there's no right answer. You don't want to expect to break even on your first run. And if you produce more units, you can get your costs down. So kind of decide what the goal is for you. I'm okay with people doing less, but they just need to know that the price is going to be higher. Solutions. Here's just some tips, kind of, guys. So in-stock fabrics are important. Look for low minimum fabrics where you can just buy a roll. You want to use fewer colors and fewer fabrications in your collection. You want to pay more per unit. Pay more per unit for less units. Leverage some fabrics and colors across different styles, and then go through this with your manufacturer. Tell them your priorities. Talk about money a little bit. So understanding what you're prepared to spend before reaching out is important. Again, knowing the retail price points first gives you an idea of what your margins are going to be. Are you financing this or are investors? So getting clear on how you're capitalized is very, very valuable. How many styles do you want to produce? And what do you want to compromise on? Basically, there's going to be some choices to make, and budgeting for all of these stages, not just the product itself. A little bit more here. Deciding on speed, quality, and price, which is always important. You can't have them all, but the idea is you want to know what is your main core competency. Maybe you have a huge audience, but not a lot of cash flow. So leveraging that to work with your factory. And one of the, it's interesting, I've had a couple of people that have had some very creative ways of working with their manufacturers. And some of them have worked out very well. I have a friend who did it right out of the gate and partnered with a manufacturer, and they did millions of dollars together. They sold all over the world, and she was able to leverage a partner, but she gave away equity, right? So be creative in that process and figure out how you could possibly work with a manufacturer, and identify your financial goals for the next few years. Okay, look at the relationship. Think about this investment. You just want to look out for the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. Focus on the return rather than the cost. A lot of times, $10,000 sounds like a lot, but then if I ask, well, how much money do you plan to spend or plan to make over the next few years? And the answer is, well, 500K, $1 million, $2 million. You're going to be making to make $1 million, you need to make somewhat of an investment. So plan that out and be okay with whatever that's going to be. And again, you're not going to be breaking even immediately. I say this all the time, but I would love to see someone bring me a break-even document so that I can support them to kind of like get there. So other advice, don't nickel and dime a factory with the promise of a large order. I can't tell you how often I get this. People come in and they're They're all basically saying, well, we're going to be huge and promising all this other stuff. Now that's fine. And I do believe you. I do believe in you. But it's important to look at the assets you have and leverage those instead of trying to, make promises that you don't necessarily know if you can keep at that point. So have somebody on your side who has business experience. This could be a factory, but it could also be just a consultant or a partner. You'll know you've chosen the right factory if it feels like they're making investment with you, they're putting some time into it. And so just clarifying that and getting clear on what they can do. Last question is talk about the long-term support. What communication will stop after production, right? What are the expectations there? And most factories will not support too many things outside of the manufacturing. So understand what their capabilities are. What can they cover? What are they up against? And what do they need in their business to thrive? So just the empathy thing, again, coming back to that is very, very huge. So that's basically it, guys. All I want to say, the two major points here I wanted to just bring up. One, again, about the USA versus overseas. Start local. Start with somebody that you can work with. And I cannot tell you the benefit of doing that. As you grow, if you want to move overseas, that's completely fine. But in the beginning, it's very valuable to do that. I met a girl on Saturday, and this is the type of thing that I hear every single day, where basically she had been in a place where she wasn't starting her line or she had been thinking about doing this for 7 years. 7 years. And because she couldn't decide which niche to choose. And so the best piece of advice and the most important thing out of all of this is that you get started. The riskiest thing is that you don't do anything, okay?